Hello. So somebody kindly asked me to correct the predictions that I made at the end of on the nature of America, and it's actually a great question. This is going to be a very long answer and definitely kind of a rant. I have a lot to say on a lot of fields. Um, so just very briefly, of course, I'm going to assume that anybody that's listening to this will have read the book, or at least has understood the general explanations. So, how have my predictions changed? Hmm. Well, let's start with the beginning. In 2025, I had completed the book by very early in the year, roughly March, April, I was done. I added a few changes when the summer war in Iran, so the 12-day war happened, the missile war, and I essentially wrote about Iran something that was kind of done under peer pressure, which was that Iran would be a terrible mistake, and I felt like they'd never do it because it would be unbelievably stupid. And lo and behold, yet again, we find ourselves with somebody that's supposedly competent and educated and supposedly understands things very well, being unable to predict that very dumb people will do very dumb things. And the dumb thing has been done. Iran has begun. And that has changed a lot indirectly, but also very little ultimately. What it has done, and the biggest change compared to the original predictions of the book, without question, is the time frame. So I want to explain just for a second the time frame in which I foresaw the downfall of the American empire. I wrote in the book that it would take, in my eyes, 10 to 15 years, so 2025, that would make it 2035 to 2040. This has no particularly strong basis in time, but there were good reasons as to why I wrote it. So first off, the real date, as I personally expected it, was 10 years. I didn't think it would last 15. I felt like 10 years was a realistic expectation as to when the empire would fall. I chiefly believe that because of two reasons. One, the American economy was already reliant on essentially the continuation of the same system that led to the subprime crisis, as it was again arriving at a moment of finding the fall after the cliff. So the housing market in the US has started going back above 2008 levels around, I think, 2014, 2016. But the real problems actually are COVID and all the money lending that came after it. 0% interest rates essentially brought the lending to infinity, and we ended up having another housing market crisis because, well, as I wrote in the book, the entire system is rotten to the core, and the only thing it can do is inflate assets to infinity. So the inflation to infinity, when you give it 0% interest rates, and in this case it really was 0% interest rates for almost anything, that led to almost 50% housing prices difference, so 50% increase between 2020 and 2024, I believe. So needless to say, when everything housing is 50% more expensive, you are going to face a hard crash as soon as money is worth something again, as soon as the insanity of free money ends. And it ended in 2023 because already inflation was going haywire. The second problem alongside the housing markets is the car market. Now, I know this seems like just a little brother to the housing market, but I tend to believe that it's a little worse than people imagine, because the car market is very often the used car market. These days, not many people can afford to buy completely new cars because everything's so expensive. Only the elderly really can. Almost everybody else buys used cars. And they buy it on financing that essentially means that you buy a supposedly $5,000 car, but by the end of your payments, you'll have paid $15,000. Needless to say, this is insane, but the entire system, again, is corrupt to the maximum. And as such, I really cannot help but notice that, particularly in a country like the US, which is still extremely heavily reliant on cars. I mean, it's not like Europe isn't, it is. It's not like Asia isn't, it is. Everyone needs individual transportation vehicles. But in America, more than anywhere else, public transportation is generally frowned upon. And the country is just very large. It is just very, very large. And unlike, say, the Chinese or the Europeans who have extensive rail networks, the Americans, it's basically cars or planes. And obviously not many people have their own personal planes. So when you imagine that in 2008, a lot of people that could no longer afford their houses went and got cars, as in they lived in their cars for a year, 2 years of their lives maybe, or they lived in tents by the roadside, you have to imagine that the people now will have their cars repossessed, which means they will not be able to go to work, at the same time that they will lose their houses. Because all of it is financed on 0% interest rates, all of it is financed on infinity money printing, and the money printing is no longer affordable because the entire economy is going to blow the hell up. I cannot help but envision literal entire parking lots filled with tents and with people absolutely boiling with anger at how things have turned out. I cannot help but imagine something like a refugee camp in the middle of some big American cities. And we'll see. I expect that they'll, dole out the funds to hide some of the ugliest and feed people so that they don't have riots. It's not going to get so bad that you're going to have food riots. They still have enough money to cover for that. But I cannot help but imagine just the loss of faith in the American economy, in the American image, and of Americans themselves in their own country. I cannot imagine how bad it's going to get when these bubbles, both the housing bubble and the car market bubble, are going to burst. And when are they going to burst, as always, is a little hard to say, because in a sane economy, it would not burst in the sense that the bubble would not be allowed to start in the first place. The fact that they allow it to start and the fact that they let it grow as much as they can also means that when it goes bad enough that they need to let it burst, well, they just pump more money, they just add more credit, they just scrounge up whatever they can to make the mistake last as long as possible. And it always makes things worse, but that's the American system. Again, it's rotten to the core. Alongside these serious public financial problems, you have the obvious AI bubble. I'm not going to lecture anybody on the AI bubble, it would be a bit long, but just so we're clear, the general plan right now is to pour $1 trillion in the hopes of making $1 billion or $2 billion back. Needless to say, that's insane. The technology is not mature enough to be financially viable. I'm not saying that it is not functioning. It is functioning. I'm saying that it is not economically viable. You can't spend something like $1 million on NVIDIA GPUs and then sell a service for $100 a month that is going to serve something like 1,000 customers. Even if everybody comes and you get 100,000 a month, well, if you have $1 million, that's fine enough. You get your money back in 10 months. But the thing is, the entire bubble system means that as soon as you make 100,000 back, they're going to throw money at you. They're going to throw money at whatever AI company they can find, so that instead of having $1 million worth of NVIDIA GPUs, you end up buying $1 billion's worth, 10 billion's worth, 100 billion's worth, and you keep going as much as you can. All that's doing is inflating the cost of RAM, inflating the cost of NVIDIA chips, inflating the cost of data centers, inflating the cost of everything towards no actual viable, addressable market. Look, I use AI extensively when I want to read up on historical facts. Let me tell you what that looks like. I use Grok, which is free. I don't pay a penny for it. I use Grok. I ask it a question about some event in history. Then it spends what I can only imagine is several kilowatt hours to answer me. I imagine that it costs crazy amounts of money just to answer my prompt about some event in the early Middle Ages. And that's it. I have been educated. Thank you, Grok. But if you told me, Bavo, that cost $4 to get your answer, I don't have $4 to give you every single time that I need to ask a question. Period. Almost no one does. Yes, it's a lot faster than the old way, as in, Googling. It's a lot faster than reading page after page after page looking for information. But I'm not paying this much money for that. And that is ultimately the problem for everyone, whether you are a terminal consumer like me, whether you're a corporation. In corporations, the problem's even worse. They will spend thousands of dollars a month to replace one worker with AI because the AI is cheaper. But then what happens? What happens is the AI is not mature enough to be reliable. And without reliability in the job, well, you need humans to come and check if the AI did things right. This is something that I noticed particularly in programmers where you had the sort of starry-eyed moment where everyone's like, man, Claude is coding all my stuff for me and it works, it's wonderful. And a few weeks, give or take a few months later, the same people came back and said, man, instead of coding for hours a day, I now correct Claude for hours a day. And it's not really any better. That doesn't mean that AI will never code well, but immature is immature. You can ask a 10-year-old child to write something for you. You can't ask them to write as well as a 25-year-old would be. And the same goes for AI. It's just a technology that has a bright future ahead of itself, arguably as big as the internet back in the day. I mean, one day AI will run almost everything for us. But that day is not today. They have given the funds that should have been spent between 2020 and 2024, between 2020 and 2025. That is stupid. It's insane. There is no way the technology can evolve fast enough to return these crazy amounts of funds. So the AI bubble will eventually burst. It's probably already happening. The car market and the housing market bubbles will all burst. And what I explain fairly extensively in the book is that the ultimate power of the United States is to print dollars and to attract foreign capital by printing dollars. So it's something like, I have this American company, I have this German company, they both produce the same thing, and if you put your money in the American company, you'll get better returns. How do they really get the returns? One way or another, there's a lot of financial engineering, and the financial engineering boils down to, we're just going to get some suckers to work harder. We're just going to print money, either through private banking, so loans, or financial engineering of some kind, either through outright, when push comes to shove, the Fed, just printing bills. This is the reality of the American system. It's all boiling down to printing dollars, more than anybody else, and to still pretend like the dollar is worth even close to what it's actually worth, which is probably, I don't know, I couldn't give a number, but it's probably not even half, probably not even a fourth of what it should be. The US should be seen as a country that ultimately washed down its currency so hard that, well, its currency is barely worth anything anymore. So the US should not be seen as a military empire or as a political empire. It should first and foremost be seen as a financial empire, as the country that has the political and cultural weight heavy enough that they can just print to infinity and still act like they have a perfectly viable currency and that they're completely rich and that everybody should just accept what they do.